Hello, little children. It's Mr. Moorhead. I hope that you are doing well. I hope you enjoyed the lesson yesterday. Yesterday's lesson kind of ran over just a little bit. I'm trying to keep this all right around 30 minutes, if not less. So I'm going to make today's lesson a little bit shorter. First off, let's take care of some housekeeping. To kind of review, we talked about an economic bubble. An economic bubble can form around an entire economy, around a single product, or around an industry like the oil industry. Remember, an economic bubble is where people are rushing to buy something. The value is going up ridiculously high, or at least the thought of the value, or the perceived value, I should say, is going up ridiculously high, and people are starting to borrow money to buy this item. Now, we looked at individual items. We had the example of toilet paper, and two people ended up giving that example. Brandy also gave that example. I hadn't graded her paper yet, but she gave that example, and Noah gave that example as well of toilet paper. I had 4 or 5 people that needed to redo that assignment. If you are super confused and have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm going to give you one more popular answer. Please don't use this one. Think of something else, because there's literally hundreds of things that you guys have seen as a bubble in your life. Fidget spinners. Some fidget spinners went upwards of $20. I remember this distinctly. A fidget spinner called the Super Spinner. It was $20. You can still find fidget spinners at the Dollar Tree for $1. So fidget spinners had an economic bubble. They're super valuable, and now, like, you almost can't give them away. On Tuesday, we looked at the Great Depression. The Great Depression was the largest economic bubble ever, and it started in the United States. People were making money everywhere. If you bought a piece of land this year, in 3 years, there's a good chance it's worth double. So people were buying and buying with the thought process is, if I just buy this piece of land, or buy this stock, or buy this home, or buy this farm, if I just buy this, it's going to be worth so much more in the future. I'll be rich. And people were borrowing money to do so. This will eventually create a collapse. Now, I told you the collapse was kind of complicated. We generally call it the stock market collapse of 1929 as being the first event. But again, people did not really feel this until a little bit later, with an event called the run on banks, where people were withdrawing their money so fast, banks could not pay everyone and then just went out of business. We talked about some of the hardships that those businesses had for the next 10 years. So that's our review. I have released, for the economic bubble part, I've released all the information back to you. If you turned something in, I commented back to you. If you didn't get a comment back, please contact me. Also, this is different now that we're in a different setting. I am leaving the document open. So normally when we were in class and you took a quiz and you answered it, it would show you that you did it and it would show you your answers. It's not going to do that from here on out unless we end up back in school. What I'm doing is leaving the document open so you could answer 4 or 5 times. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because I have a lot of kids that didn't understand the assignment, probably about 10. They talked about soap, they talked about bubble gum. A lot of people didn't understand that we're just not talking about prices going up. Like a car when I was little was probably around $6,000. Cars today, a new one, maybe $20,000. That's inflation. That's not a bubble. That's just money slowly losing value over time, so things become more expensive. So again, I've had people have to redo this assignment, and rather me going in and then re-releasing the assignment to them and having 6 or 7 steps in there, I'm just leaving the document open. So if you go to answer and you're like, oh, I submitted it, but I don't see my answer, I got it. Now, I will contact you if I didn't get it from you, and say, hey, please submit this in the future. I don't see one from you. But again, it's not like it used to be where you could click and still see all of your answer. So please don't freak out. I had some people do the assignment 4 and 5 times. You don't have to do that going forward. And I apologize that I didn't communicate that better. All right, we're going to talk about the rise of dictators today. So we got a review. We've got the economic bubble. We got the Great Depression that we talked about. We did the announcement, and now we're on to a different topic. Now, our general topic is interwar. That includes the Russian Revolution, the battle between the Red and the Whites, Rasputin, the Great Depression, and this is also included. It's the rise of dictators. This is where we see folks like Hitler take power in certain countries. When we cover this, a lot of these folks did awful things. When we talk about the rise to power, we're not necessarily talking about like the horrible things that they did. We're just talking about how they got in power. Those lessons will come later. All right, so please keep that in mind, that we're studying one segment of these people's lives. The person that you're going to get today is Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was the leader of Italy. He's an interesting character because his life is full of opposites. I can give you an example. When he was younger, elementary school age, very young elementary school age, like kindergarten, first grade, he struggled to talk. He had extreme problems communicating, that sometimes, he was thought of that he might have had extreme special needs. But he turns out to be one of the greatest speakers in history. I'm not saying what he said was good, obviously, but he had no problem getting up in front of thousands of people, and he would give these rousing, great speeches. So it's kind of an opposite. He goes from not being able to talk to being one of the world's greatest speakers. Also, he attacked a teacher while he was in school. He stabbed a teacher. This gets him kicked out of school. Strangely enough, his first job will be as a teacher. So generally the kid that gets kicked out of school for attacking a teacher, that's not the person you think of as becoming a teacher themselves. So couldn't talk, great speaker. Stabbed a teacher, kicked out of school, becomes a teacher. Another thing that he did, he moved out of Italy because he refused to join the military. He was forced to join the military by the government. It's in other words called a draft, and he fled. He went to another country to keep from joining the military. Strangely enough, when World War I starts, he voluntarily joins the military. He is actually injured, and he is portrayed as a bit of a war hero. So again, kind of the exact opposite from early in his life to late in his life. One final opposite, and there's there's dozens that I could go over. One final is that he was a socialist. Remember, that's the economic theory where we're trying to have the government or community own business. There's not competition. Everyone is not necessarily paid the same, but there's no extreme wealth, no extreme poverty. It's high taxes and large government control. Not a lot of products, not a lot of invention. But there are a lot of services that are paid from this tax money. So that was his idea on economics. And he even had a socialist newspaper. He was very important to the Socialist Party. He actually will quit that and form his own party, the Fascist Party. So if you hear someone talk about fascist or fascism, that is actually the party of Mussolini. Today, people will use the word fascist as a pejorative. A pejorative is something that is just said to be negative. I have heard that the word fascist used in a context that makes no sense. The person is trying to just say that the other person is a bad person. Real fascist or fascism is linked to this party in Italy. And this party in Italy comes to power. It gains more power. Mussolini will be in charge of the fascist party. And he had a group that were called the Black Shirts. The Black Shirts, obviously, they're wearing a black shirt, kind of khaki pants, and they would go around, and if you said something bad about the fascist party or about Mussolini, they would let you know very quickly that you needed to stop. Or if you didn't stop, hey, like maybe your brother's not going to come home tomorrow, or your house might be burned down. Like, they were very, very intimidating. That's kind of where we get the word fascist today, meaning that you're not allowed to have an opinion other than what someone tells you. That would be fascism. In Mussolini's time, if you disagreed with him, oftentimes like you disappeared, or you were threatened to the point that you no longer disagreed with him. Another interesting thing about Mussolini is he never actually was voted into power. Italy is struggling through the Great Depression, this economic bubble, and he put so much pressure through his newspaper, through public appearances, that the King of Italy actually names him as being in charge of the government. It was supposed to be a short-term move, but he kind of said, I don't know if you've ever done this, if someone's aggravating you, oh, I could do a better job. Well, here, do it. That's kind of what the king did to Mussolini. And sure enough, he becomes in charge of the Italian government. And it wasn't short term. He kept control of the Italian government well into World War II. I will tell you two interesting things. One, I had a substitute in my class, and I used to have two teachers in one particular class that I taught. I had a substitute in there, and that teacher was, I would say, maybe in her 80s. And again, this was maybe 15 years ago, and I gave this whole lesson on Mussolini, and she raised her hand toward the end, and I recognized her. I said, yes, ma'am, what do you need? And she had actually lived in Italy in like the late 1930s. She was a little girl, and she couldn't remember exactly like everything that had happened, but she did remember her parents talking about it and their views toward Mussolini. And while her father and her mother struggled because of the Great Depression, but initially they actually favored Mussolini. And you see him become very popular amongst Italians of this time, because Italians are struggling and their government wasn't working. So while Mussolini was intimidating, and you had these roaming almost gangs of black shirts that would enforce basically that you couldn't speak badly. They would limit your freedom of speech. The economy actually started working some under Mussolini, or at least it had the appearance of working. There is a saying, and even she repeated this, that Mussolini, at least the trains run on time, because the economy was doing so badly prior to that oftentimes trains just didn't show up. People weren't showing up to work. They weren't being paid. They didn't put in a lot of effort. They weren't making much money if they were being paid. So that was kind of a saying that, hey, everything's working on time now at the very least. So I thought that was interesting that I actually had somebody in the room that was alive during this period and lived in that country. One final thing that was funny is another time I had a slideshow up, and I had left a letter out of black shirts, and you can kind of guess which one it is. So it formed something that you don't want to say. It's the R, it's missing. So I had that up on the slideshow, and I am teaching away, and I see all the kids giggling, and I'm like, what on earth are they laughing at? And I started to get angry, and one of the kids pointed at the board, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that doesn't say shirts, it's missing the R. So I ran over to the computer and I tried to shut it off and then fix it real quick. But that was definitely one of the most embarrassing things I've done teaching. So 2 extras there for you. So what I want you to do is, you've listened to the slideshow, I made it shorter. Also check out right here. My slideshow will appear below it because I haven't posted it yet. Check out this history brief. You're down to about, I would say, probably could finish this all in 15, 18 minutes. make sure you go over and check that you completed this assignment. You guys did a great job. I appreciate it. And take care. We will see you tomorrow.